My name is Celia Monroe, and I spent 27 years loving a man who used my savings to take his new wife to the Maldives. The money I'd set aside while clipping coupons, skipping vacations, and working overtime as a second-grade teacher. He used it for sunset dinners and luxury villas with someone else. And when they came back, arms tanned and smiles smug, they found out the house was gone. Sold, emptied, erased, just like I'd been. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I watched them pull into the driveway and realized that everything they thought they owned was no longer theirs. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. You know, there's something strange about betrayal. It doesn't hit you like a truck. It creeps in like a fog. You don't wake up and say, "My husband is going to ruin me today." No, you pour the coffee. You pack his lunch. You remind him where his cufflinks are. You kiss him goodbye at the door and tell him you love him, not knowing that the next time he boards a plane, it won't be with you. It's funny. For years, I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought holding on to the marriage, the routines, the joint bank account meant strength. But love without respect is just slow heartbreak. And sacrifice for someone who sees you as invisible is not noble, it's self-erasure. Daniel and I met when I was 23. He sold me my first apartment. He was charming, ambitious, and said he wanted a woman who could challenge him. For a while, I believed I was that woman. I brought stability. He brought vision. Together, we built a life. At least that's what I thought. We had a daughter, Emily. She was the best part of our marriage. Still is. When she left for graduate school last year, I thought Daniel and I would finally have time for us. To travel, to reconnect, to live the life we delayed while raising a child and saving for retirement. Instead, I watched my husband withdraw, little by little. He worked late. He forgot anniversaries. I assumed it was stress. I blamed the market, his health, anything but the obvious truth. I had become a placeholder, a wallet with a wedding ring. You know that feeling when you wake up and realize you don't recognize the person lying next to you? Not because they've changed, but because you have? That was me, staring at a man who once brought me coffee in bed, now scrolling through his phone while I talked about my day. I'm not telling you this for pity. I don't want sympathy. I want you to understand something very simple. Even the quietest women, the ones who fold laundry, pay bills, and keep their rage buried under politeness. Even we have limits. So when I found out about the Maldives trip, the beachfront dinners, the private yacht, the $14,000 he withdrew from our joint account, I didn't scream. I smiled. Because by the time he came back, the house he left me in was already listed. And when he stepped out of that Uber, tan and laughing with a woman half my age, his mouth dropped. The sold sign in the yard said it all. And me? I stood by the porch holding the keys, not to give him, but to toss into the moving van. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I needed and found something better, myself. Before everything fell apart, my life looked fine, normal even. From the outside, you'd think I had it all figured out. A comfortable home in a quiet Ohio suburb. A husband who wore crisp button-downs and smiled at church potlucks. A daughter, Emily, who called every Sunday and always said, "Love you, Mom," before hanging up. I wasn't chasing luxury. I wanted warmth. I wanted peace. And for a long time, I truly believed I had it. I taught second grade at Franklin Elementary. It wasn't glamorous, but it grounded me. My days were filled with spelling tests, missing shoelaces, and paper turkeys taped to the walls in November. I loved those kids. I knew which ones were shy, which ones needed extra hugs, and which ones never brought lunch because no one packed it for them. After work, I'd swing by the grocery store, usually clipping coupons out of habit more than necessity. I cooked dinner from scratch almost every night, partly because I loved feeding my family, partly because Daniel liked to remind me how much money we saved by not ordering out. It didn't bother me. I liked our routines. I liked us. Daniel was busy, always moving. Real estate doesn't slow down, he'd say, and I'd nod, thinking I admired his hustle. He wore expensive shoes, kept his hair neatly parted, and always knew what to say at client dinners. When people asked how long we'd been married, he'd squeeze my hand and joke, "Too long for her to back out now." We had that kind of banter. At least, I thought we did. On weekends, we cleaned the garage or sat on the porch. Emily had just moved out for grad school in Boston, and the house felt a little emptier, but I believed that was normal. I'd see her photos on Instagram, her dorm, her lab, her new friends, and feel proud. A chapter had closed, but another was beginning. I had dreams too, quiet ones. I'd saved for years, quietly stashing money away from birthday checks, holiday gifts, and a side tutoring job I never talked about. It was our savings, officially, but I knew it was mostly mine. I didn't mind. I imagined us using it one day. A trip to Maine in the fall, or maybe Italy if we got brave. I'd even printed out pictures and made a small travel board tucked behind cookbooks in the pantry. I never showed Daniel. I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought we'd grow old together. I imagined us reading on the porch, Daniel with his whiskey and me with a blanket and tea. I pictured grandkids one day chasing fireflies in the backyard. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a plan. Our neighbors, the Bennetts, once said we were one of the solid couples. I remember blushing at that. Solid, safe, steady. I liked the sound of that. But now, looking back, I realize how much of that life was built on silence. Not lies, exactly, just things never said. I never told Daniel how alone I felt when he came home late without a word. I never told him how much I hated the way he'd interrupt me in front of others like I was a child. I never asked why he changed his phone password. I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want to be dramatic. I'd tell myself, he's stressed, he's tired, he loves me, he's just not good at showing it. I folded that doubt like laundry, tucking it neatly into drawers. That's what women do, right? We make space. We soften our voices. We say, it's fine, even when it's not. Looking back, I can still smell the lavender oil I used to rub on my wrists before bed, hoping it would calm the tight feeling in my chest I couldn't quite explain. I thought I was just getting older. Maybe it was menopause. Maybe I needed to exercise more. The truth was simpler and far more painful. The truth was, I was disappearing, and I didn't even notice. Because in the life I had built, in the marriage I thought was solid, I'd forgotten to save a place for myself. I gave everything. Time, love, money, without ever imagining a day when I might need to keep something back. Just in case. Just in case the man I trusted with my whole life decided to take someone else to paradise, using what I gave up everything to build. But I wasn't there yet. Not then. I was still the wife who made his coffee just right, left notes in his suit pocket, and smiled when he kissed me on the forehead like a brother might. I thought that was love. I didn't know yet that it was the beginning of the end. The first red flag didn't look like a red flag at all. It looked like a Tuesday night. Daniel had been out all day showing properties, and I had made his favorite. Chicken marsala with roasted rosemary potatoes. It was one of those small efforts that felt sacred to me, a quiet way of saying, I see you. I love you. I'm here. I called him around 5:45 to ask if he'd be home for dinner. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. 10 minutes later, he texted, busy, showing a place. Don't call unless urgent. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering above the screen. I typed out, okay, just checking in. Be safe. Then deleted it. Then typed it again. Then deleted it again. Finally, I sent just okay. The food grew cold. He didn't come home until 9:30. No apology. No mention of dinner. He went straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and turned on the game in the living room. I watched him from the kitchen, standing in my apron, still holding the dish towel in my hand like some kind of prop in a forgotten play. I told myself he was tired, that he must have had a rough day. But something about the way he looked through me, like I wasn't even there, made my chest tighten. A few days later, I found a receipt in the pocket of his jeans while doing laundry. It was from a cafe across town I'd never heard of. 2 lattes, 1 almond croissant. Maybe he met a client. Maybe he was just hungry. I didn't ask. I just folded the jeans and slid the receipt into the trash like it didn't matter, but the shift had begun. Not long after that, I noticed he'd changed his phone password. We used to know each other's, not because we snooped, but because we didn't need to. I'd sometimes use his to check the weather or look up directions while we were driving. Now, when I asked him to unlock it so I could call Emily, he snatched it from my hand. "I'll do it," he said sharply, and typed the code before handing it back. I laughed it off. "Since when do we keep secrets?" He didn't answer. That night, I brought it up in bed, gently, carefully. "Hey, is everything okay with us?" He rolled over, not facing me. "You always make things into drama. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even an argument. That's what made it worse. It was indifference. Like he couldn't be bothered to care that I was hurting, that I was starting to doubt things I never thought I'd question." I started noticing how little he touched me. Not in a romantic way, even in passing. No hand on my back as he passed behind me in the kitchen. No brushing his fingers along my shoulder as he used to when I read on the couch. It was like living with a polite stranger. Then came the open house. He'd asked me to help stage one of his listings on a Sunday afternoon, something I used to love doing, picking flowers for the table, arranging books just so. But that day I showed up with the tray of cookies and found him already inside, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, probably in her early 30s, with glossy black hair and nails that looked freshly done. She wore heels to an open house. I stood there for a second, awkward and uncertain, while Daniel waved at me without enthusiasm. "Oh, hey, this is Kara," he said. "She's helping with staging now. You didn't have to come." Kara smiled, but her eyes didn't. I handed over the cookies, mumbling something about how I had already baked them, and left. He didn't follow me out. He didn't even text. On the drive home, I cried, not because I knew he was cheating, not yet, but because I realized I didn't feel wanted anymore. I felt replaced. Not by Kara necessarily, but by his disinterest, his lack of effort, his disregard. The first red flag wasn't a scandal. It wasn't lipstick on a collar or a secret phone bill. It was silence, distance, shrinking space between two people who once shared everything, now standing on opposite ends of the same house, pretending that was normal. I didn't confront him. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was tired, that maybe I just needed to focus on myself more. But deep down, something had shifted, and I was starting to realize love doesn't feel like this. Emotional erosion doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens slowly, like waves pulling at the shoreline, gentle enough that you don't notice, but constant enough to eventually wash you away. In the months that followed that awkward open house, the silence between Daniel and me grew dense. Not angry, just empty, and that emptiness felt louder than any shouting ever could. He stopped asking about my day, stopped saying good morning. We'd eat meals in the same room without speaking. I'd cook for two, but he rarely touched his plate. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed at all that I'd started using less salt. He used to complain about sodium. Now, nothing got a reaction. One evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror studying my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Tired eyes, faded smile lines, shoulders that had forgotten how to stand tall. I tried applying lipstick, a shade he once called his favorite. But when I walked downstairs and asked if he wanted to go out for dinner, he barely looked up from his laptop. Not hungry. Got emails. No compliment. No, you look nice. Not even a glance. I sat on the couch alone that night in a dress I hadn't worn in over a year. The TV buzzed in the background, but I couldn't focus on a single word. I remember placing my hand over my stomach, not because I was sick, but because it felt hollow, like something inside me had quietly left. Little things became gut punches. I'd try to share something funny a student said at school, and he'd respond with a disinterested, "That's nice." If I told him about a tough day, he'd say, "You're lucky you don't have to deal with real pressure." I started walking on eggshells in my own home. I stopped initiating conversation. I told myself he was just stressed, that business was hard lately, that maybe he was going through something he didn't know how to express. But deep down, I felt it. I was being erased. He didn't criticize me. He didn't yell. He just excluded me. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, I wasn't his partner anymore. I was a background character in his story, someone he used to know. We used to laugh over board games on weekends. Now, he played poker with colleagues online. We used to plan summer getaways, even if it was just a cabin a few hours away. Now, he talked vaguely about maybe getting away by himself for a bit. We used to share a bed like lovers. Now, we slept like distant roommates. Back to back, or not at all. Once I tried to initiate intimacy. I reached out, gently placed my hand on his chest in the dark. He shifted away without a word. My hand dropped like a dead weight onto the sheets, and I just stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night, my heart breaking without sound. It was death by 1,000 little absences. At school, my coworkers started asking if everything was okay. I smiled too hard, said I was just tired. I started staying late in my classroom. It was easier to be around children than to go home and feel invisible. Emily called one weekend and asked if Dad was around. I said, "He's out." She hesitated. "He's been out a lot lately." I brushed it off, changed the subject. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, that something in our marriage had cracked wide open, and neither of us was trying to patch it. I even started to question myself. Was I boring, too plain, too predictable? I bought new clothes, changed my hairstyle, signed up for a cooking class. He didn't notice a single change, and that hurt more than any cruel word. The house began to feel colder, even in summer. I kept the windows open longer just to hear birds or distant traffic, something that reminded me I still existed. Some nights, I stood barefoot in the kitchen at 2 a.m., drinking water I didn't need, just to feel something. The tiles beneath my feet, the cool air, the stillness, they were the only things that didn't ignore me. It wasn't just that Daniel had grown distant. It was that I had disappeared, and no one, not even the man who vowed to love me forever, seemed to notice I was fading. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring when it happened, the moment that broke whatever thread of dignity I had left. The air was warm for April, and the sun made everything look deceptively hopeful, like life was blooming again. But for me, that day marked a very different kind of awakening. Daniel and I had been invited to a neighborhood barbecue hosted by our friends, Mark and Denise, people we'd known for over a decade. We used to play cards with them every other Friday night. They knew Emily when she still wore braces and carried a stuffed elephant everywhere. I hadn't seen them in a while, and I almost declined the invitation, but Daniel insisted we should go. For appearances, he said. That phrase felt like a slap. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, taking extra time with my hair. I wore a soft green blouse and white linen pants I hadn't dared wear in years. I told myself it was just a gathering, but secretly I hoped he'd notice, that he'd look at me and remember who I was, who we were. He didn't. He barely looked at me. The moment we arrived, he drifted off with a group of men by the grill. I stayed near the women, sipping iced tea, nodding along to stories about vacations and remodeling projects. Denise came over and gave me a warm hug. "You look lovely, Celia," she said. "So good to see you two together. You've been so quiet lately." I smiled. "Too big." "Just busy," I said. "You know how life gets." About an hour in, someone brought out a few bottles of wine. Laughter floated through the backyard. Daniel was on his second beer, leaning back in a lawn chair surrounded by people. Kara was there too. I hadn't realized at first. She blended into the crowd, but once I saw her standing next to him, laughing at something he said, I couldn't unsee it. She was wearing a sundress that barely touched her knees, sunglasses pushed back into her shiny black hair, and wedge heels that made her tower. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a beach magazine, not in the backyard of a Midwestern barbecue. I was pouring a glass of lemonade when I heard my name. Daniel's voice, loud and unmistakable, followed by a wave of chuckles. "Celia used to burn pasta," he was saying, "for a year straight. I thought we were going to die of undercooked noodles." Everyone laughed, including Kara. "She even bought this Cooking for Beginners book and kept it under her pillow like it was the Bible," he continued. I stood there, frozen. My hand clenched the lemonade pitcher until I thought the glass might shatter. He knew I hated that story. He knew it embarrassed me. I had told him in confidence years ago how hard I tried to learn to cook when we were first married, how I wanted to impress him, how I cried the night I ruined his birthday dinner because I'd followed the recipe too closely and still failed. And now it was a punchline. My effort, my vulnerability, my memory, reduced to entertainment. I didn't storm out, I didn't cry. I walked over calmly, placed the lemonade on the table, and said, loud enough for those around him to hear, "At least I never forgot your birthday." The laughter stopped. Kara looked confused. Daniel's smile faltered. I held his gaze for a moment. He looked at me like I was a stranger who had just told him an inconvenient truth. I turned and walked away. In the car, he didn't speak. Neither did I. The silence was heavy, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was clarifying. That night, I lay in bed and realized I'd felt more seen by strangers at that party than by the man who promised to love me forever. Not because they valued me, but because they witnessed what he no longer tried to hide. His disrespect, his contempt, his casual cruelty. I understood something important that night. It wasn't just that he didn't love me anymore. It was that he didn't respect me. And without respect, love is meaningless. That humiliation didn't destroy me. It woke me up. It was the moment I stopped trying to win him back and started remembering who I was before I forgot myself trying to keep him. 2 weeks after the barbecue, I found a folded note on the kitchen counter. Not a letter, not even a full sheet of paper. Just a yellow sticky note, the kind I used to leave on Emily's lunchbox in 2nd grade. "Celia, I'm going to stay at Kara's for a while. I think we both need space. Daniel." That was it. No, "I love you." No explanation, no conversation, just a half-scribbled sentence left beside an empty coffee mug and a trail of muddy footprints on the tile floor. I stood there in my bathrobe, the kettle hissing behind me, that pathetic little note trembling in my hand. I read it again and again, waiting for it to change, waiting for him to come back through the door and say it was a joke, or a test, or a mistake. But the front door stayed closed, and the sound of his tires crunching down the driveway never came, because he was already gone. He didn't pack a suitcase. He didn't take his charger, or shaving kit, or even the jacket I'd just dry cleaned for him. That told me all I needed to know. He wasn't leaving in a rush. He was already living a second life. He had a toothbrush somewhere else, a closet full of clothes I'd never washed, a woman who wasn't waiting up for him every night, hoping he'd look at her the way he used to. I didn't scream. I didn't chase after him. I didn't even call Emily. Not yet. I just sat down at the kitchen table, staring at that sticky note as if it were a document outlining the death of my marriage. And still, I couldn't cry. I think I was too numb to feel anything real. It wasn't until later, when I walked into our bedroom and saw the unmade bed, the socks he'd always kicked off at the foot, the cologne he never wore anymore, that the tears came. Quietly, without warning. They rolled down my cheeks like warm apologies from a body that couldn't speak the words. People think the end of a marriage is some big explosion, but sometimes it's a man walking out without slamming the door, and a woman standing in the hallway, too tired to run after him. The days that followed were blurry. I went to work, smiled at kids, passed out spelling tests, answered emails. But inside, I felt like I was watching myself from the outside, like an actor trapped in a scene she didn't audition for. I moved through each hour with a practiced kind of numbness, the kind you learn after years of being ignored. He didn't text, didn't call. There was no apology, no follow-up, no explanation. The silence said what he never had the courage to. I'm done. I started cleaning, obsessively, the kind of cleaning that felt more like exorcism. I scrubbed baseboards, emptied drawers, donated boxes of his old clothes, rearranged furniture, not because it made me feel better, but because it was the only thing I could control, the only way I could mark that he was truly gone, and everyone assumed I was done too. Neighbors waved politely but didn't ask questions. Friends sent casual, thinking of you texts that I didn't have the energy to answer. Even Emily sensed something was wrong but didn't press. She was busy. She was far away, and I couldn't bear to say, "Your father left." Not yet. Some nights I sat in the living room alone, the TV on but muted, flipping through wedding albums. I stared at the photos like I was studying strangers. There was Daniel, eyes crinkled in a smile, holding my hand. There I was, in lace and pearls, looking up at him like he was my whole future. I wanted to shake that version of me and whisper, "He won't stay. You won't recognize him when he leaves." But other nights, fewer but stronger, I sat outside on the porch and listened to the crickets. Just sat. Just was. And something inside me would whisper, "You're not done yet. Not even close. I hadn't left him. He left me." But in doing so, he forced something open. He forced me to see just how little of myself was left in this house, in this life we built. And as painful as that was, it made one thing crystal clear. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to rebuild. Everyone thought I was broken, quiet, defeated. But I wasn't. I was rearranging, reconstructing, silently standing up from the rubble of my own life. And while he thought I was sitting in that house waiting for him, I was already imagining what it would feel like to let it all go. Rock bottom didn't feel like a crash. It felt like a slow, silent descent, a quiet drowning in my own home. It had been nearly a month since Daniel left, and still, no call, no text, no, "Are you okay?" No, "Let's talk." He vanished from my life like I was a forgotten appointment in his calendar, something once necessary, now irrelevant. Each morning I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that buzzed in your ears like a warning. I would shuffle through the house, barefoot, touching things that used to feel familiar. The coffee pot, the chipped mug he always used, the recliner where he used to fall asleep during baseball games. Everything was still there, but the life had been drained from it, like furniture abandoned in a staged photo. I stopped eating regular meals. I'd nibble on crackers or make toast and forget about it halfway through. My stomach didn't rumble anymore. It just felt heavy, like it was full of stones. Some days I couldn't bring myself to shower. I'd sit on the edge of the bed with a towel in my lap and just stare at the floor. Not crying, not thinking, just still, paralyzed by a pain I couldn't explain to anyone. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from realizing the one person who was supposed to love you, protect you, willingly walked away without looking back. One morning, I opened the closet to get dressed and saw his suits still hanging there. Dozens of them, neatly pressed, color-coded, a habit I had kept up out of love. The man wasn't even living here, but I had continued organizing his life like a ghost wife. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I sat down right there, on the floor of the walk-in closet, and finally, sobbed. Not the quiet tears I'd let slip in the shower. This time, it was guttural, loud, ugly. My face buried in one of his blazers, breathing in whatever scent was left. The faintest hint of his cologne, the one I used to pick out for him every Christmas. I cried for everything, for the girl I used to be, for the woman I became, for the time I wasted loving someone who saw me as disposable, for the years I spent being dependable, kind, supportive, and invisible. I didn't hear the phone ringing in the other room. I didn't care. I sat there until my throat ached and my hands shook from holding myself too tightly. Later that night, I tried to call Emily. She answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say, "Come home. Your father left. I'm falling apart." But I didn't want to ruin her life, too. "I'm okay," I lied. "Just wanted to hear your voice." We talked about her classes, her new lab partner, her plans for summer. I listened, nodding silently, clutching the phone like a lifeline. When we hung up, I stared at the dark screen for a long time. Then I set it down gently on the kitchen counter and turned off the light. That was the night I dreamed I was underwater. Not drowning, just submerged. Everything muffled, everyone far away. I was suspended in cold, dark water, watching the surface above but unable to reach it. I woke up gasping, heart pounding. The next morning, I walked outside barefoot in my robe just to feel something. The grass was cold with dew. The sky was overcast. I stood there, arms crossed, breathing in the damp air, when a neighbor, Mrs. Chen, walked by with her dog. "Morning, Celia," she said, smiling kindly. "You doing okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Fine, just enjoying the morning." But even she didn't believe it. Her smile softened. "If you ever need to talk, I make a mean cup of tea." It was the first time someone saw me. Not the version I performed, not the fake smile I put on at the grocery store, but me, the crumpled, quiet, unraveling me. That small moment cracked something open. Rock bottom isn't just about grief. It's about silence, numbness, that dangerous place where you start to believe maybe this, the loneliness, the invisibility, the ache, is just who you are now. But something in that moment, standing in the wet grass with frizzed hair and empty hands, told me, this can't be it. There had to be more. I didn't feel strong yet. I didn't have a plan, but I knew, deep in the bones that had carried me through everything, that if I could feel pain this deeply, I could feel other things again, too. Hope, power, purpose. I just didn't know yet how close I was to discovering it. It started innocently enough. I was at the dining table with a notebook and calculator, trying to make sense of my new life on paper. I had been putting off the inevitable, sitting down and truly looking at our finances now that Daniel was gone. Part of me still clung to the hope that it was temporary, that he'd come back and say it was a mistake, that we'd talk, fix it, cry, maybe even laugh at how close we came to falling apart. But that hope had gone quiet, and the numbers on the page were loud. I opened the drawer where we kept our financial documents. Bank statements, mortgage info, tax returns. I found the manila folder labeled Savings and Investments, with my handwriting still on the tab, neat and hopeful from a time I still believed we were saving together. As I sifted through printouts, something caught my eye. A recent transaction from an account I didn't recognize. A withdrawal of $14,870 from what appeared to be a travel agency. I frowned. It wasn't our usual credit card. It was from a linked account I hadn't looked at in months. An old joint savings we'd opened when Emily was born. It was supposed to be emergency only, and we'd promised never to touch it without discussing it together. I logged into the account online. It had been drained almost completely. Transaction after transaction showed up in the past 3 weeks. Resort bookings, international flights, restaurant charges in places I'd never heard of. I clicked on the largest charge, and my breath caught. Vela Private Island, Maldives. I blinked at the screen, then clicked again, just to be sure. And there it was. A week-long stay at a luxury resort I had once circled in a travel magazine, dreaming about going with Daniel after retirement. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers went cold. My vision blurred as I scrolled. Spa packages, yacht rentals, candlelit beach dinners, charges for 2 guests. 2. I wasn't one of them. That account wasn't filled with his commissions or Kara's designer purse money. That account had been built on my sacrifices. The overtime I'd worked. The school supplies I'd paid for out of pocket without ever asking for reimbursement. The summer camps I declined so we could save just a little more. That money was mine. Ours, technically, but mine in soul. And now it had paid for them. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, unmoving. Then I opened Facebook. Something in me, a buried instinct, needed confirmation. Kara had an open profile. She never changed her settings. I clicked. There they were. Photos perfectly lit from a resort that looked exactly like the one in the transaction. Daniel with his arms around her on a boat. Kara holding a cocktail against a turquoise horizon. A short video of them clinking glasses at dinner with the caption, "Nothing heals the soul like the ocean," and love. A red heart emoji. Dozens of likes. I didn't cry. I laughed. One of those sharp, disbelieving, bitter laughs that bursts out when the pain is too big to process. So this was it. The end of my marriage wasn't marked by a signed divorce paper or a screaming match. It was this. A romantic beach getaway paid for by a woman he discarded like a coat that had gone out of style. I leaned back in the chair, my hands still shaking, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was insult. It was theft. It was betrayal so deep, it pierced through decades of history, memories, and motherhood, and for the first time since he left, I wasn't paralyzed. I was awake. The illusion had shattered. The lies were exposed. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't wondering if I had done something wrong or if I hadn't tried hard enough or if I'd missed a chance to save us. I saw clearly now. He hadn't just left me. He used me. And now I was done pretending to be the quiet, forgiving woman who made it easy for him. I closed the laptop. I stacked the documents. I took a deep breath. He thought he left me in that house, lost and broken. He had no idea I had just found everything I needed to begin again. The day after I discovered Daniel's betrayal, the photos, the stolen savings, the exotic vacation that had been my dream, funded by my sacrifices, I didn't collapse. I didn't scream, cry, or crumble into 1,000 pieces like a woman in a movie. I woke up, not in the dramatic cinematic sense. There was no thunderclap moment, no slow pan to my face with swelling background music. Just a quiet click inside me, like a switch being turned for the first time in years. I got out of bed at 6 in the morning, the same time I always had. I brushed my teeth, I pulled my hair back, and then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I looked in the mirror and held my own gaze. I stood there, silent, studying my face like I hadn't seen it in years. The fine lines, the tired eyes, the softness around my jaw that didn't used to be there. I didn't hate any of it. I didn't wish to be younger or prettier or sharper. I just saw myself, clearly, fully. I was still here, still standing, still me. And that realization changed everything. I went into the kitchen and brewed a cup of coffee. Not for anyone else, not as part of a routine, not to serve someone else's day, but for me. I drank it slowly by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise through the trees behind our backyard. The same trees I'd watered and trimmed and talked to when no one else was listening. That morning, I opened my laptop, not to check social media, not to look at Daniel's trail of humiliations, but to look at my bank accounts, to see what I still had, what I could build from, what parts of my life hadn't been stolen, only sleeping. I started making a list. What do I want? Not what do I need? Not what would be smart or safe or predictable. What do I want? I wrote, peace, independence, a life that doesn't revolve around anyone else's shadow. A cabin by the mountains, maybe, to feel powerful when I walk into a room, to never silence my voice again for the sake of someone else's comfort. It wasn't some grand declaration. It was a whisper, but a strong one. The kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind that grows louder with time. I remembered a moment years ago when Emily was 6. She'd been scared to go on stage for her school play. She was crying backstage, clinging to my skirt, saying, "What if I mess up?" I knelt down and said, "Then you mess up, but you go out there anyway." Because brave isn't perfect. Brave is trying when you're scared. That memory hit me like a message from my own past self. It's okay to be scared, but do it anyway. So I got dressed. I didn't reach for the usual oversized sweater or the loose jeans I wore to feel invisible. I pulled out a navy blue blouse I hadn't worn since Emily's college tour, the one that made me feel like I had somewhere to be. I put on earrings, real ones, lipstick too. Then I walked into the guest room, the one Daniel never bothered to clear out, and sat at the desk. I opened my old laptop, the one I used to use for tutoring sessions. I searched for divorce attorneys near me, then how to sell a house after separation, then solo travel destinations for women over 50. I wasn't making a statement. I was building a map. That evening, I went for a walk, just around the block, the same houses, the same mailboxes, the same neighbors, but everything felt different. Because I was different. I wasn't the woman who waited anymore. I wasn't the one refreshing my inbox, hoping for an apology. I wasn't mourning someone who had chosen someone else and expected me to stay frozen in grief while he lived freely. No, I was thawing. I was stretching. I was rising. Somewhere deep inside me, the woman I used to be, the one with sharp instincts and a loud laugh and dreams of Italy, had heard my cry. And she was coming back. Quietly, steadily, powerfully. Not to get revenge, but to return to herself. I didn't announce anything. There were no angry texts, no warning phone calls, no social media declarations, no "you'll regret this" speeches or teary confessions. What came next wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. My silence wasn't passive. It was strategy. After my awakening, I spent a week quietly building the foundation of a new life, brick by brick. Not for show, not for Daniel, but for myself. The first step was calling my cousin Angela. She worked in real estate and had always said, "If you ever want to sell the house, I'll help." No pressure. I'd laughed it off every time before. This time I asked for a meeting. Angela was sharp, fast-talking, and fiercely loyal. When I told her I was ready to sell, she didn't ask why. She just said, "I'll make it move." I didn't tell her about the Maldives. I didn't tell her Daniel had left me or that he used my money. That wasn't necessary. What mattered was that I wasn't clinging anymore. I was letting go, on my terms. I spent the next few days going through the house like a curator preparing for a museum closure. I didn't cry when I boxed up wedding photos or donated Daniel's golf clubs. I didn't linger over the couch where we used to watch movies or the dinner table where we once celebrated birthdays. I moved through the rooms with the quiet efficiency of someone who had finally made peace with walking away. Anything that didn't serve the woman I was becoming, it went. I called a financial advisor, a woman named Taryn, recommended by a retired teacher friend. We met in her office, a calm space with floor-to-ceiling windows and soft jazz playing. I handed her a folder of statements, including the documentation of the drained savings account. She skimmed through it, then looked up at me. "You've been taken advantage of." "I know. We can build from this." I nodded. We talked retirement accounts, asset protection, legal options. She spoke with clarity and without condescension. She gave me next steps, real ones, actionable ones. For the first time in months, I felt in control, not of Daniel, not of the past, but of the future. I booked an appointment with a divorce attorney the same day. Her name was Marisol. She was direct and didn't sugarcoat anything, and I liked her for that. She listened to my story without flinching. When I told her about the stolen savings, she didn't hesitate. "He used marital assets for a personal affair. We'll recover what we can." I asked if I could do all of this quietly. No drawn-out battles, no drama. Just what was legally mine and the freedom to leave with it. She smiled. "You want clean and swift? You got it." Back at home, I began packing my life into two categories: keep and release, not just physical items, but emotional anchors. Guilt, release, blame, release. The constant need to explain myself, release. In the garage, I found a dusty journal from the year Emily started high school. Flipping through it, I saw entries written by a woman still fighting to matter in her own home. A woman who stayed up all night planning birthday surprises for a man who barely remembered the date. I closed the journal, not out of pain, but closure. That version of me deserved better. I whispered, "Thank you," and placed it in the release box. At night, I made lists. Not to-dos, but possibilities. Places I could move, things I wanted to learn, books I never read, skills I shelved for years. I kept it taped to the fridge, and every morning I'd read one line aloud like a promise to myself. Daniel never called, not once. Maybe he thought I was quietly suffering, lost in the ruins he left behind. Maybe he assumed I was frozen in grief, too meek to act. I didn't care what he thought, because while he was lounging on beaches and sipping overpriced cocktails, I was preparing for something he would never see coming. A woman no longer waiting, a woman who didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. My setup wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel. It was silent, deliberate, and powerful. Because true transformation doesn't beg to be noticed, it just gets to work. It was subtle at first, like the hush before a storm. The kind of shift you don't see until it's already taken root. The moment when silence stops meaning weakness and starts meaning control. I didn't tell Daniel I'd listed the house. I didn't tell him I'd hired a divorce attorney, or that I had begun the legal process to separate assets, or that I'd frozen what remained of our accounts. What he didn't know was that every time he failed to check in, every time he assumed I'd just sit in that house waiting for him like some abandoned relic, he gave me more power, and I used it. While he lounged under the Maldivian sun with Kara, posting filtered pictures of their beachfront dinners and matching linen outfits, I was finalizing paperwork with Angela, the realtor. We agreed to a quiet, expedited listing. No open houses, only vetted buyers. The market was hot. It sold in 6 days. I stood in the backyard the day the final offer came in, hands tucked into the sleeves of my cardigan, watching wind roll through the maple trees, the same trees Daniel used to hang Christmas lights from, the same yard where Emily learned to ride a bike. I expected to feel sadness. Instead, I felt space, a clearing. That house didn't feel like mine anymore. It hadn't in a long time. A week later, Daniel finally reached out. "Hey, I might swing by the house to pick up some of my stuff. Should be quick." No hello, no, how are you? Just the casual arrogance of a man who thought the world remained on his schedule. I didn't respond right away. I waited 3 hours. Then I texted back. "You'll need to coordinate with my attorney. The property is no longer in our possession." His response came fast this time. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For years, I had lived in his rhythm, responded quickly, soothed egos, filled in emotional gaps he left wide open. But now, I'd become something he didn't know how to deal with. Unavailable. The next day, I received a call from his lawyer. Apparently, Daniel had concerns about the house sale and wanted clarification on asset distribution. Marisol, my attorney, responded professionally and firmly. Everything had been done legally. His lack of involvement was not my burden. I imagined him pacing somewhere, voice raised, trying to explain to Kara why the house he left me in had been sold, why there was no key waiting, why the door he once slammed shut behind him now belonged to someone else. Let him explain. Let her understand who she'd really chosen. And that's when I realized the power had shifted. Not because I'd humiliated him, not because I'd outmaneuvered him, but because he no longer controlled the narrative. He wasn't the man who left his wife for a better life. He was the man who underestimated the woman he left behind. Emily came home for the weekend just after the house sale finalized. We were sitting on the floor of my temporary apartment, eating takeout from a Thai place around the corner, when she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled. "I feel like I can breathe again." She reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom." And for the first time in a long while, I believed I deserved it. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't chased. I hadn't pleaded. I had simply acted. And that was something Daniel never saw coming. He had mistaken my silence for surrender, my stillness for fragility. He forgot the most dangerous kind of woman is the one who rebuilds herself without asking permission. The people who once pitied me, neighbors, coworkers, even family, started to look at me differently. Not as the one who got left, but as someone who chose not to stay stuck. I had gone quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching, planning, becoming. And by the time Daniel realized the ground beneath him was shifting, I had already walked away from the rubble, head high, hands clean and free. The day Daniel came back was overcast, the kind of sky that sits low and heavy, full of things it hasn't decided whether to release. I was standing in the driveway of what had once been our house, now stripped of its soul, packed up and ready for its new owners. The "sold" sign stood tall on the lawn like punctuation at the end of a sentence. I didn't expect him to show up that afternoon. The sale was done. The movers were already on their way. The keys had been transferred. I had nothing left to say. And apparently, that was the exact moment he decided to come around. His black Lexus pulled into the driveway like he still belonged there. Like the past 6 months hadn't happened. Like the Maldives, Kara, and that yellow sticky note had been figments of my imagination. When he stepped out of the car, he looked different, slightly thinner, a few more grays in his beard. He wore a leather jacket I didn't recognize and mirrored sunglasses, which he took off the moment he saw me standing by the garage, clipboard in hand. "Celia?" His voice was casual, confused. "What's going on? Why is there a moving truck here?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to take him in, really see him. This man who once knew how I took my coffee, who once promised to love me in sickness and in health, who used my savings to romance a woman I'd never met, and who didn't think I'd ever fight back. He looked around the yard like he was the one who had been betrayed. "You sold the house?" "I did," I said, calm and firm. "2 weeks ago, closed yesterday." "You sold it? Without even telling me?" "Without needing to," I replied. "My attorney handled the filings. Yours was CC'd." He blinked. "I didn't check my email. That's not my responsibility anymore." There was no drama in my voice, no bite, just clarity. And for him, that was far more jarring than a slap across the face. He took a step closer. "You can't just do that. This was our house." I shook my head. "No, Daniel. You gave up your right to call it ours when you walked out without a conversation, without a plan, and without a shred of decency." He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. For once, I didn't give him space to spin a story. "You left a note. A note, Daniel. After 27 years, that's how you ended things. And while you were drinking cocktails with Kara on a beach, I once dreamed of visiting with you. I was sitting in that kitchen wondering how I'd become so small in a life I helped build. I didn't think you'd—" He started. "No, you didn't," I cut in. "You didn't think I'd move on. You didn't think I'd be capable of letting you go. You thought I'd just sit here, waiting, devastated, maybe broken, until you decided what version of me suited your life again." He looked at the moving truck, then back at me, finally starting to understand. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly, "but you did, and now you're surprised I did something about it." He took another step forward, softer this time. "Celia, we've been through so much, and I survived all of it," I said, "including you." That was the moment it shifted, truly shifted. The weight he once held over me, the emotional strings he thought he could still pull, they snapped. I could see it in his eyes. He was searching for the old version of me, the quiet, agreeable wife who smoothed over conflict and kept the peace. She wasn't standing there anymore. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I turned toward the movers. "Be sure to take the boxes marked donate straight to the drop-off, not the storage unit," I said, loud enough for Daniel to hear. He lingered for a second longer, then finally asked, "Where will you go?" I met his eyes. "Anywhere I want." I didn't owe him answers. I didn't owe him closure. What I gave him that day wasn't confrontation. It was a mirror. And for the first time in a long while, he had to face what he'd done, what he'd lost. I walked away without looking back, because the most powerful thing I could say was nothing at all. And sometimes, silence is the loudest truth there is. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I received a letter in the mail from Marisol, my attorney. It was crisp, neatly folded, and stamped with the words, "Time-sensitive, legal documents enclosed." I opened it slowly, half expecting just another update on paperwork. But what I found inside was the final unraveling of Daniel's carefully maintained facade. Along with the official divorce filings and property transfer records, there was an enclosed letter from the bank. Confirmation that legal action had been approved to reclaim misappropriated marital funds, specifically the nearly $15,000 Daniel had withdrawn from our joint savings account, the one he used to whisk Kara off to the Maldives. Marisol had been working behind the scenes while I quietly sold the house and split the rest of our assets. She had filed a claim based on a clause in Ohio marital law, intentional misuse of shared funds for personal affairs, and it had stuck. The letter stated that the funds had been frozen in his personal account, and restitution would be issued directly to me within 30 days. I stared at it for a full minute, not out of shock, but satisfaction. Not because I needed the money anymore, but because I wanted accountability. That money represented more than just stolen dollars. It was time, trust, It was every sacrifice I'd made while clipping coupons instead of taking trips, saying no to new clothes so we could put more toward retirement, teaching summer school while he networked at business lunches. He had taken all of it and spent it on her. Now it was mine again. That evening, I made tea and sat by the window with the letter in my lap. Outside, the wind rolled through the trees. For the first time in months, I felt like I could exhale completely. The money wouldn't erase the betrayal. Nothing could. But this? This was justice. Quiet, firm, and poetic. I didn't reach out to Daniel. I didn't have to. News like this travels fast, especially when lawyers are involved. But I did hear from someone else. It started with a voicemail. "Hi, Celia, it's Kara. I don't know if you'll even listen to this, but I thought you should know. I didn't know about the account. I didn't know that money wasn't his. He said it was a business bonus. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I just didn't know." I deleted the message. The next day, Daniel called. I didn't answer. Then he texted, "We need to talk, please. It's important." I didn't respond. That night, a long email arrived in my inbox. 5 paragraphs, apologies, excuses, nostalgia, a poor man's attempt at redemption. "I never meant to hurt you." I was confused. "Things with Kara aren't working out. Maybe we rushed into it." I read it once, then again. Then without a word, I hit delete. This was my justice. Not the legal win, though that mattered. Not the money, though it had weight. My justice was in knowing he had finally come to understand what he lost. He lost the woman who carried him through every lean season, who held the family together when he was too proud to admit mistakes, who sacrificed her own dreams so he could build his. And now, he had no wife, no house, no money he could touch. Kara left him shortly after. Mutual friends confirmed it. She moved back to her hometown in Indiana, apparently told people he wasn't who she thought he was. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Daniel now lives in a small apartment above a vape shop on the edge of town. No lawn, no porch swing, just fluorescent lights and cheap blinds. And me? I'm living proof that a woman can be destroyed and rebuild herself from the ground up, stronger than before, not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve. My final justice wasn't that Daniel lost, it was that I won. On my own, without begging, without breaking, and without ever lowering myself to his level. I took back what was mine, and more importantly, I took back me. About a month after the funds were returned and the divorce paperwork had been finalized, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was from Emily. "Hey, Mom, I was thinking, would it be okay if I came home for the weekend?" Her voice was casual, but I could sense something deeper, something unspoken. I hadn't seen her since the house was sold. She'd visited during the packing, helped me tape up old boxes of childhood trophies and yearbooks, but she hadn't yet visited the small cottage I was renting on the edge of town. My new beginning. "Of course," I said. "I'd love that." She arrived on a Friday evening with an overnight bag and a small bouquet of flowers. Sunflowers. My favorite. The moment I opened the door, she pulled me into a long hug, tighter than usual, like she didn't want to let go. "Nice place," she said as she stepped in. "It feels calm." "It is," I said. "It's not big, but it's mine." We spent the evening cooking together in the tiny kitchen. I let her chop vegetables while I stirred the pot on the stove. We fell into the rhythm we always had. Effortless, natural, comforting. We laughed more than we talked about anything serious until we sat down to eat. That's when she looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Dad called me." I put my fork down slowly. "He said he's sorry, that he messed up, that he didn't realize how much damage he'd done until it was too late." I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, letting the words hang in the air. "He asked if I thought you'd ever want to talk," she added quietly. I told him I didn't know. There was no malice in her voice. No agenda. She wasn't pushing anything. She was just caught in the middle, the daughter of 2 people whose love story had turned into a cautionary tale. "I don't hate him," I said after a long pause, "but I don't need anything from him either." Emily nodded. "I figured, but I told him I'd pass it on." After dinner, we curled up on the couch with mugs of tea and an old movie playing softly in the background. She asked about my new job. I'd started tutoring part-time again. And about the book club I'd joined at the library. I told her about the neighbor next door who had a cat that always wandered into my garden. We laughed. We shared stories. But underneath it all, I knew she was watching me, trying to figure out if I was okay, and I was. Later that night, while we were brushing our teeth side by side in the bathroom, she glanced at me in the mirror and said, "You're different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter, stronger. You don't seem afraid anymore." I looked at her reflection and smiled. "That's because I'm not." And it was true. The version of me Daniel had left behind was gone. The woman who second-guessed her worth, who measured her value by her husband's attention, who silenced her discomfort for the sake of keeping peace. That woman had been replaced by someone who knew how to stand alone, someone who didn't need to be chosen to feel complete. That weekend, Emily stayed up late with me, talking about her future. She confessed she was thinking about switching her grad focus, that she wanted to move out of Boston, maybe closer to home. Not for me, she insisted, but because she was ready for something different, something quieter. "Wherever you go," I told her, "you'll figure it out. Just don't ever let someone else decide what your life is supposed to look like." She nodded, eyes glossy. "You didn't just survive this, Mom. You rebuilt. That's brave." The next morning, after she left, I sat on the porch and watched the sunrise over the trees. I thought about Daniel, not with anger, not with longing, but with distance. He was part of my story, yes, but he no longer defined it. He had tried to return through Emily. Maybe someday he'd try more directly. But it didn't matter. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need validation. I had peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't come from other people doing the right thing, but from you choosing yourself even when no one else will. Let him call. Let him regret. I didn't need him back, because I had found me. The morning I officially moved into my new home, I woke up before the sun. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but earned. I stood barefoot on the wooden floor of the little living room wrapped in an old quilt my mother had stitched when I was a teenager. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt rooted. Not to a house, not to a marriage, not to a title like wife or Mrs. Monroe, but to myself. There was no rush, no errands, no one waiting on breakfast or expecting a schedule. Just me, the soft hum of the morning and a cup of hot tea warming my hands. I stepped out onto the porch, inhaling the cool air of early spring. The sky was painted in delicate shades of lavender and coral, slowly unraveling the night. In that stillness, I reflected not just on the past year, but the woman I'd become. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing alone in a different home, no Daniel, no our plans, no shared everything, I would have felt terrified. I spent nearly 3 decades building a life around someone else's needs, routines, and moods. I wore loyalty like armor. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I lowered my volume, my hopes, even my needs, all in the name of keeping peace that wasn't real. I thought strength meant staying, but I know better now. Real strength was found in leaving, even when I didn't have all the answers. Real strength was discovered in moments when I could have begged, but chose instead to breathe deeply and say nothing. In every step I took away from what hurt me, I came closer to who I was meant to be. I used to think I needed closure from Daniel. I thought I needed him to see me, to regret what he did, to recognize what he threw away. But closure didn't come from his guilt. It came from my clarity. Clarity that I had loved fully, that I had given honestly, that I had stayed long past when it was good for me, and that I survived the unraveling. That was enough. I learned to appreciate my own company. I found joy in small rituals. Early walks, weekend farmers markets, handwritten letters to Emily, who now called more than ever. I started keeping a gratitude journal, not because I was trying to be someone else, but because I needed to remind myself daily of how far I'd come. And it wasn't just the big things. It was the tiny wins that built my new life. The first time I assembled a bookshelf alone. The moment I stood up to a pushy bank manager and refused to be talked down to, laughing out loud at a comedy show without flinching, realizing I didn't need someone beside me to enjoy it, saying no without guilt, saying yes without explanation. That's healing. One afternoon, I took a photo of myself standing on a hiking trail near my new home, wind in my hair, cheeks flushed from exertion, grinning like a woman who had just reached a summit, both literal and symbolic. I sent it to Emily with one line, "Getting stronger every step." She replied within seconds, "I see it, Mom. I'm so proud of you." There was a time when being alone felt like punishment. Now it felt like power. Daniel was no longer the villain in my story. He was simply a chapter. A long, painful chapter, yes, but one that taught me more than any joyful moment ever could. He showed me what I was not, and because of that, I found who I am. As the sun climbed higher over the horizon, I picked a wildflower growing near the porch. Just a simple purple bloom. I tucked it into my hair and smiled, not because someone would see it, not for photos, not for a husband's praise, but for me. Because I still deserved beauty. I still deserved joy, even and especially after the storm. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet promise to myself. Never again will I forget my own worth. And with that, I stepped into the day, whole, steady, free.